Good morning, everybody. I'm Jonathan Spalter. I'm chairman of Mobile Future, and we are going to try to be creatively disruptive this morning. And I want to start actually with a very quick video that'll give you a sense of the excitement of just where we've come in this last year in the mobile web. Can we roll?
I have exactly 98 seconds to detail this year's most remarkable moments in mobile. Stop texting for just a moment, kids. This is your 2012 Mobile Year in Review. In 2012, Twitter took home the gold in nearly interrupting the Olympics. Londoners were asked to limit their tweets to urgent events, lest wireless traffic crash the networks. At 31 million tweets, the American election was the most tweeted event in history. 6 in 10 Americans want the right to vote via wireless. This Thanksgiving, Instagrammers shared a record 10 million photos, peaking at 226 pics per second. In another trophy-worthy moment, Facebook bought Instagram for $1 billion. In 2012, Apple performed more like a country than a company. iPhone 5 sales could single-handedly move the entire $15 trillion U.S. economy by up to 0.5%. Apple sold more mobile devices in 2012 than they've sold computers ever. More than half of Americans now own smartphones, and there are more than 1 billion active smartphones on planet Earth. Mobile data usage literally doubled in 2012. How? Watching YouTube, Gangnam Style. Over 50% of all mobile data is videos, and we watch 9.3 billion mobile videos in the US alone. So, everything's going mobile, which is good, but wireless data and devices are sucking up mobile spectrum quickly, which is markedly less good. Shall we despair? Not today, friends. The future is bright, and the future has a weird name. 4G LTE. It's like 2011's mobile network, only much, much faster. Our continent is home to 69% of the world's LTE subscribers. We lead the world in next-generation mobile. And finally, Foursquare is gaining adoption, a few million light years away. NASA's Mars rover checked in on the red planet, meaning that precisely 100% of Mars's inhabitants are Foursquare users. That, my friends, is your 2012 Mobile Year in Review. See you in 2013.
And just think about it. 40 years ago this month was the first mobile cell phone call that was ever made. It was 25 years ago that the famous Gordon Gekko on another beach was walking around with that large brick, the Dynatec 8000X. Think of how far we've come in just this amazingly short period of time. We all have a much more powerful device. It's hardly a phone. It really is just a powerful computer that we can put in our pockets. And if you think about it, it's not just our ability to speak to each other or to text each other that represents the capacity and capabilities of this device. It's everything being connected. In the next few years, well, right now, we're going to be able to have 9 connected devices per person through the Internet of Things. We're entering a really new age of the Internet, and that age is defined as the mobile social web. If you go to the next slide, please. Global data traffic. We're entering a completely new age of the Internet. The data traffic trends that we're seeing reflect an explosive growth. We say hockey stick. It gives it real and true and vibrant meaning in this slide. The app economy that we're all part of. I mean, think about it. 5 years ago, the word app wasn't even part of the commercial lexicon. There's now potential for a $25 billion market in the app economy. I think we have a slide for the app economy here, if you can show that as well. There's an enormous amount of wireless adoption in the world, but it's important to know that the United States still remains the highest per capita number of smartphone users anywhere in the world, but more broadly across all economies, increasingly and importantly in the developing world, and we'll speak to that in just a moment, the adoption of smartphone technology is keeping a pace, and it's a tremendously innovative cycle. But you know, there are ceilings to these opportunities. The mobile future is bright, but it still is somewhat fragile. We have to worry significantly about capacity, intellectual capacity, making sure that we have the scientists, the engineers, and the researchers in our country and in other countries in order to continue innovation. We need to ensure that we have STEM education. The H-1B visa discussion is very important. But as too is the needed capacity of electromagnetic spectrum. We're very, very focused in our work in ensuring that we can continue to innovate, but we still need that invisible infrastructure of spectrum to continue the innovation cycles to make sure that we will continue to enjoy a prosperous mobile future. And there are 4 people here who are really at the very cutting edge of ensuring that future and are doing some of the most amazing innovation in mobility that I've been able to meet, and I'd like to introduce them to you today. Kit Beal is the Vice President of Global Service Product Segment at Cisco. He ran Cisco's mobile internet practice, and I think of many companies are in the mobile space, but Cisco really is a poster child for the concept of an idea becoming an industry. When Len Brosak and Sandy Lerner, the husband and wife team, wanted to talk to each other on their computers at Stanford, that became the inception of the idea of Cisco, which is now a $12 billion annual revenue company with 70,000 employees around the world, significantly focusing on ensuring we maintain the infrastructure now and in the future to allow the continued growth and dynamism of the mobile internet. Marion Brownstein is the Vice President of Product Management at Epocrates. She was previously with GE Healthcare. And Epocrates is actually an enormously important story. It's an Athena healthcare company now, but it's recognized as having developed the #1 healthcare application for physicians and healthcare providers in the country. Think of this, half of all physicians in the United States of America are connected in one form or another with Epocrates software development and products. It's a revolutionary concept, and we'll talk about that more. On my left, we have David Carr. David is a graduate of the very prestigious MIT Media Labs. I was able to visit with him in his offices at Super Mechanical, which he founded in Austin. And what he's decided to do is to really explore the potential of the Internet of Things by building a device which, powered by a simple USB or even a AAA battery and armed with temperature and orientation sensors, will allow all of us to essentially tell our devices to do anything we want them to do, either from measuring basement flooding in our houses to when a door has been opened when we're not at home. David is envisioning how we all can become masters of the Internet of Things. And what's really interesting, not only does his device only cost $100, but the way that he actually started his company was as innovative as the idea itself. He was a poster child for Kickstarter. When he launched his company, he went to the crowdfunding concept to actually bring him the oxygen that has led to his innovation. At the time, the 3rd most highly funded Kickstarter project in the world. So we'll hear from David as well on the Internet of Things and the future of mobility. And Corey Andreka. Thank you for joining us, Corey. Corey's Vice President of Mobile Engineering at Facebook. He came to that position for having been CTO from the fabulously innovative Second Life, part of Linden Labs. His boss, Mark Zuckerberg, said that today there is no argument. Facebook is a mobile company, and it's Corey who is making that possible from a technological perspective. Mobile advertising to messenger applications and mobility for smartphones, they really are hard at work making the mobility and Facebook a conjoined concept. And just recently, it was Corey that was behind this explosively important development for Facebook and Facebook mobility, which was going after the most important, primest real estate known on the face of the planet. It's not up in Malibu on the beachfront. It's actually this piece of real estate right here, our home screens. The launch of Facebook Home in its partnership with HTC in Taiwan has essentially put Facebook right on page 1, screen 1 of our lives. And the opportunities that are going to flow from that, not only for Facebook, but for our concept of mobility, will be very profound. We're going to talk about all of this, but I'd like to actually start at the beginning, which is infrastructure. And Kit, Cisco and your work is principally involved in thinking through, where is the infrastructure we need? How do we actually develop it? And what do we need to do to sustain it? Can you talk to us about what are some of the key infrastructural issues that we're confronting in the elaboration of the mobile web?
Absolutely. So, Jonathan, I'm going to make one small correction on your introduction without going into detail because we're in our quiet period, but we're at $12 billion a quarter, roughly, not $12 billion a year. John Chambers would be very upset if I didn't make that small
I was talking
correction.
about EBITDA.
Yeah. So in terms of mobile infrastructure, we've come a long way. And you tell the story about how Cisco was founded with basically 2 professors who wanted to communicate to one another, which is how the first router was created. As we look at the mobile internet, the mobile web, there are really, I'd say, four big themes, and you've touched on one of the most important up front. And it's a policy issue, and we look at it as infrastructure, and that is spectrum. The current policy around spectrum in really across the world, quite frankly, is very fragmented, and it's very difficult. Even when I go to Europe, people say, well, you have the EU, right? There should be a spectrum policy. And the answer is no. There's a UK spectrum policy, a Dutch spectrum policy, French, so on and so forth. So this, I think, globally is going to be one of our biggest challenges and frankly, is one of the most important assets in the infrastructure space. But besides that, and we can come back to that, I'm sure there'll be a lot of good discussion on this topic, we see three other things. One is the multitude of radios. So a lot of people think about the wireless business as being 2G, 3G, 4G LTE, as you had in the video. But we look at it as being a real plethora of radios. And one of the ones that we think is really important is Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi, again, is a public use, operates in the public use spectrum. Very, very important. So it's important we see 2G, 3G, 4G, Wi-Fi, even Bluetooth and some of these other technologies all coming together to form the mobile web. Two other things. One, I would say the virtualized infrastructure, this notion, and again, Facebook's done a great job on this, really getting away from these sort of fixed assets and having things that are much more flexible. You'll hear a lot about web speed and fail fast. That virtualized infrastructure is what enables that. And so again, that's this idea of getting away from a kind of a one-to-one server to application kind of relationship, and we think that's critical. And then the last one is something that's somewhat mundane. I'm sure none of you will remember this, but it's IPv6. And IPv6 is a technology that allows us to address all of these trillions and trillions of devices that we envision being connected to the mobile internet. And when we look at IPv6, the number is huge. I should have actually just done a slide with just the number. Just think of it as trillions and trillions of devices or addresses. There would be enough to provide 4.5 trillion addresses for every known star in the universe. That's how many addresses IPv6 provides. That means that when we start talking about a lot of these innovations, these micro sensors, being able to put things in medicines and whatnot, that's what's going to enable that kind of scale. And Cisco's been very much at the forefront of that.
Talk to us a little bit about how you see data actually evolving on the networks that you're supporting. There's been a significant shift as Netflix and others are beginning to become a dominant part of our non-work life.
Absolutely.
And for some, our work life.
Well, in fact, a company like Cisco, we use video all the time, virtually every day for internal training, meetings, that sort of thing. And what's interesting is when you look at the growth of the data traffic globally, video is actually the majority of that traffic. If you think about, I downloaded an episode of Mad Men to watch on the plane ride down here, 1.5 gig, right? I watched it for an hour and basically deleted it. So if you look at the growth, video is really driving this, and I think we got the chart here, the Cisco VNI. And you start to look at how much people are consuming. It really, as you can see, a pretty interesting distribution across the world, but video makes up about 2/3 of the mobile web. And so that's for all of us, whether we're watching a CNBC or a Fox Business clip, whether we're watching a YouTube video, or we're downloading Mad Men, it's about 2/3 of the global internet traffic. So video really is the driver. And again, we think about the number of connected devices. We were talking about this before. I went back and thought about it again. I probably have a dozen wirelessly connected wirelessly connected video devices in my home alone. So if you think about that across our population, it's going to be huge.
Talking about shifts of reference points, one of the most important shifts that we've seen, Corey, is this concept, the original concept of social, being a platform for sharing pictures or texting friends. It's evolving rapidly from that initial meme to a range of different implementations. Talk to us about your vision as the head engineer for mobility at Facebook for where these implementations are leading us and how far we're moving away from the traditional concept of what social meant only a couple of years ago.
Right, so we talk about social, Facebook's mission, we talk about making the world open and connected. And I think that view often gets shortened into social, but is actually a little bit broader than that. Because when you think about open, what it means is being able to move information around, being able to have access to information, being able to share that information. Connected means being able to share that information with the right people. And so, a lot of this started off as text, started becoming photos. We're now talking about videos. And where we are now at, really an interesting cusp for this, is what happens when virtually everyone on the planet starts having a set of powers that we could really only view as superpowers if we had thought about them a decade ago, right? So every one of you now has the ability to freely broadcast to basically anyone else on the planet exactly what you want to send to them, often with a great deal of information about who the right people to send that information to is. Every one of you can find out information that your friends want to share with you. And so at its core, I view this less about social as sort of this singularly descriptive noun, and more about what are my friends doing? What's happening in the world that's interesting to me? What's happening in the world that my friends think might be interesting to me? What's happening in the world that, if I want to follow a particular brand, or I want to follow a company, or I want to follow this conference, what's the information being broadcast out from that conference that can be brought to me? And how do we make all of that great on mobile? Facebook itself arose obviously first as a desktop web product. That was the world we lived in 2005, 2006. And while I will have friends who will take a laptop to a party and open the laptop up, I'm sure all of you would rather just carry a phone, right? And so a phone is actually a far more natural device to engage in this kind of connecting, sharing, and moving around of content. And I think the biggest change is for those of us who have been connected to technology and speaking to audiences for decades now. The number of you who have phones out right now and are connected to the world around you, that has become part of how every moment of our lives go. And so what can we do to make sure that that content that you're getting there is the most relevant, the most interesting, and the best that we can bring to you? And from our viewpoint, often your friends are the best starting point for that.
In a world as rapidly moving, as turbocharged as mobile innovation has been, in a company that supports a global family of 1 billion users, how does Facebook manage this cycle of innovation? How have you sort of envisioned this process of change from the desktop to mobility, and what's in store still?
Sure, and I think it's sort of two parts. It's one looking back about 1.5 years and one looking forward about 3 years. So if we look back 1.5 years, Facebook had mobile products in the marketplace. Obviously, we had a very large numbers of users even a few years ago. So our view into the mobile transition was quite clear. We knew that the world was moving to mobile. And if you looked at our products, we had products that were very successful, certainly by hours of use or people using them, but they weren't products that we believed to be of high quality or products that we felt allowed us to move fast enough and to develop quickly enough. So the last 18 months for us was about cultural and technological transformation, not external to Facebook, but actually within Facebook. 18 months ago, mobile was actually a separate team within Facebook. And so the goal of this separate team was to build everything needed for the preponderance of mobile application or mobile devices out there. We get on the order of 5,000 different mobile devices a day connect to Facebook. And we had one little team that was trying to build all of Facebook for all of them. And in hindsight, that's a poor choice for us. We are a company that tends to be very interconnected internally, and we want to have different groups really engage with us. And so the transition we went through was, how do we make every team inside Facebook focus on mobile? How do we make every team inside Facebook focus on building great mobile products? And to do that, we've done everything from extensive internal training. I have recruiters who go through mobile programming classes so that they can better recruit mobile engineering talent. We have engineers who are very competent web engineers who we put through training to bring them up to speed on different development methodologies. Because ultimately on the web, the cost of failure was always very low. You could fail very quickly and very cheaply. which allowed a developmental methodology that was very good for Facebook. It would just move very, very quickly on the web. On mobile, the cost of failure is different. If you're on iOS, for example, you have to go through an approval process for Apple. And Apple does this to maintain a very high standard of quality on their platform. I think they've obviously made good decisions there. But it means that, let's say you made a mistake in your product and you want to ship a fix, you can't actually ship that until Apple says you can, which can be an awkward period of time while your users are sitting there with a product that has a bug in it. Even on Android that doesn't have this gatekeeper to shipping, you have the problem of not everybody upgrades every time. And so you have this challenge of how do you get users who are on a wide variety of different phones to upgrade and come along with you. And so that's really the last 18 months. And Home, which you talked about, was really the first product that we launched. And if you haven't seen it, it's an app that runs on Android that really is optimized for the flexibility of the Android operating system. And so it does some things that you wouldn't be able to do elsewhere because Android is so flexible. And from our perspective, it's the first app we really developed knowing how to build for mobile. The next 3 years, I think, are going to be the most interesting 3 years probably ever in terms of human communication and human transition in terms of access to knowledge. Because 2 billion people are going to go from no connection to the internet to connected to the internet. And they're going to do that via phones, which means that everyone in this room first discovered the internet on a PC. That is your view of technology and your view of the web. You think of it in terms of PC terms. You think of it in terms of PC screen sizes. You're thinking about it in terms of physical keyboards. And there are on the order of 2 billion of us in that category. So 2 billion are coming who will never have seen a PC. Their transition will be directly to a phone. And it's starting today with $35 low-end Android phones that's a street price in Africa. That price is coming down even further. And the big challenge, which we can talk about at greater length if you want, is once those people have phones, what gets them to pay for data? Because even an Android phone, as capable as it is, if it doesn't connect to a data connection, you're not actually connecting to the internet. You're not actually connecting to the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the ironies of the mobile web as it's developing is that some still think it's a peculiarly American phenomenon. Of the global smartphones, 80% in fact are using operating systems that were invented in the United States, in fact here in California. But in fact, as Milken reminds us, we are a global conference.
Yeah, absolutely.
The greatest growth opportunities for Facebook, for all of our companies, will be actually in the developing world. How is Facebook right now preparing in terms of your infrastructure, but also your strategy for engaging and bringing into your platform this 2 billion incremental group of users?
So international is incredibly important to Facebook. We've been translated into many different languages for a very long time, and our user base has been a worldwide audience for years at this point. I think we look at it in a few different ways. One is being very capable on the Android operating system. Android is doing very well in developing markets because of their ability to produce very low-end smartphones. So having a great deal of competence on the Android platform is something that's very important to us. Second, we are constantly experimenting with what are the ways to bring data to people. We've certainly done zero rating programs for years at this point. Zero rating, for those who aren't familiar with it, is a way for a user or a person to have a phone and be able to use data on the phone without having to pay for it, because somewhere in the value chain, which stretches all the way from the OEM that manufactures the phone through the distributor who actually sells the phone to the carrier who provides bandwidth to, say, Facebook who provides services, somewhere in that value chain, someone's willing to cover the data costs on bandwidth. And I view this desire for people to want to see what their friends are doing, to connect, and of course, not just with friends. We see governments being incredibly active on Facebook. We see large social movements taking place that are organized around Facebook and other social media. This ability to connect to people is incredibly powerful, and it's one that is a driver for people to want data connections. Because if you've never had one, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem of why would you want to actually pay for data if you've never had it and you don't know why you need it. And being able to understand that, well, this lets you connect more to other people and it lets you have access to communities that you wouldn't have otherwise had access to becomes a very powerful driver.
Very interesting. And let me transition from that to an area of also profound importance to all of us, which is the world of how these mobile platforms are actually improving health outcomes, making our families healthier. We've seen Jawbones and Fitbits. Many of us might be even wearing these devices. We understand mHealth in terms of personal wellness. We've learned the mantra that an app a day keeps the doctor away. And I think there are around, just in the US, about 40,000 personal healthcare mHealth applications that are available freely.
Yeah.
But your company has taken a completely different perspective. You've addressed all of your suites of products at the healthcare practitioner, not the consumer. Why?
Well, I think that what is really a key driver when we look at how healthcare is going to be changed by all of the mHealth applications. Consumers certainly can adopt that, but it's not until you get into physicians who make life-enabling decisions for their patients multiple times a day, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And that connection to where we can really drive mHealth to the next level is going to be required to get adoption by the physicians themselves. This is a lifestyle for physicians. They are not people that sit at their desks. They have very mobile functions, moving from exam room to exam room between their practices and the hospital, whether they're sitting at the soccer field and taking call for their patients. They're very mobile people. And until really the advent of smartphones, they didn't have much that they could really work with in order to bring better access to care and better quality of care. A decade ago, 2 decades ago, we talked about for them what was going to be really key was that type of a device that they could carry from one place to another, like a clipboard. Mm-hmm. And with the advent of the smartphones, that's in fact what we're seeing, where they've been able to enable that. And I think that's where focusing on that very real need enables them to then connect and get the adoption that they need. So as you mentioned, we 1 in 2 physicians actually use Epocrates and Epocrates products, and it's because we've really focused on that specific need of the mobility. Once we get to that level and continue to drive it, that'll allow us to go into the next level where patients can be doing fitness and wellness applications, but how do we now make that connection between the patient themselves and the physician? And so I think, as we look at that, the 40,000 mHealth apps that you mentioned, and a marketplace that is expected to be almost $12 billion by 2018. 2/3 of that are in fact the consumers, but the other third is in fact the piece for the care providers. And without actually making that connection, we'll be stifled in how we can take innovation forward. And so we're really very much anxious on being that piece of the pie to focus on the healthcare over to the patient.
If it's the healthcare practitioner, at least in the world of mobility, that in a sense is the last mile to creating this virtuous cycle that will improve healthcare outcomes nationally, what are the incentives that need to be given to healthcare practitioners to step up and turbocharge their adoption, not only of Epocrates products, but of mobility in general? And what are the barriers for them in doing so far?
Yeah. Well, definitely I think when we look at that, when we're seeing, for instance, at the government level with meaningful use incentives that are out there in terms of trying to drive technology among physicians, one of the pieces that we really are continuing to see is just a lot of those technologies being desktop-based. Mm-hmm. And that's not fitting, really, with those workflows. So the incentives, while we can certainly acknowledge the tremendous response that the meaningful use incentives have had on physician adoption for technology, to really take it to the next level is going to require the incentives coming back to mobile technologies for them in their workplace. So we can certainly drive it. Once again, we saw the impact of the meaningful use dollars that drive adoption, but when we can really take it back to what it fits for their workflows, that's going to be important. And the plethora of devices that they use. we see right now that physicians that use more than one device actually use mobile technologies more than any of their desktop. And that's just right now. And you can anticipate what that's going to be in the future. So the incentives I actually think are inherent, not so much from a monetary perspective, but by the industry providing those mobile technologies that are going to enable that healthcare provider.
Mobility is moving very quickly. Innovation through Hippocrates and other companies like your own are really pushing the edge of the possible in healthcare impact. We know, though, that there are barriers. One of them is, in fact, government, which has not yet been as innovative in moving as quickly in matching the pace of technology. The Milken Conference is a wonderful jamboree of ideas, but also of people. And in fact, the FDA commissioner, I understand, is at the conference.
Yeah.
If Margaret Hamburg was sitting in the audience, what might you suggest to her as somebody who's thinking about product development in the mobile healthcare space?
Thanks for bringing that up. There's certainly some challenges that we see for driving toward innovation in the mobile space, especially in healthcare. So, the FDA has some significant regulations, as they should, around what a medical device is. And as you take these devices, and they increasingly become more underneath the classification of medical devices, you really have to step back and look and say, how much of those regulations are going to impede the progress for driving innovation and creativity at a very rapid pace, yet recognizing the balance of what that means to protect the patient as well. So I think that, and I do believe that this is happening in some of the activities that we're seeing in the regulations and the debates that are going on in this, is, how do we achieve that balance? How do we recognize that we need to provide in the regulations that are going to control and provide safety for the patient outcomes, but yet do it in a way with processes, so really the innovation on the processes that can enable that to happen more quickly for the mobile space and as to keep pace with the technology changes that we're seeing there. So even things like product development cycles and the product development documentation requirements that are for the FDA, those are set in software technology methodologies that are really out of date. So even if we can look at that, those are opportunities I think that we can look at for the government to really start saying how they can help to innovate to keep pace for where the mobile technologies are.
And I have a feeling, given the pace of innovation, that what we're saying here will be out of date tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly.
But one of the more innovative worlds of the mobile internet is actually where you've been focusing your attention, David, which is the Internet of Things. Can you encapsulate what that concept means, not only on a technical basis, but what it means in terms of improving the potentiality of the human experience, but also the productivity of our lives?
Exactly. So the Internet of Things is something that people have been talking about for maybe 10 or 15 years now. And it's always sort of been something that's right on the edge of happening. And I think that we're in a very exciting time right now, and that it is actually happening. And if you need any evidence, I'll point to just the fact that our company exists. It wasn't funded by venture capitalists that were speculating on the market. It was funded by our customers that gave us $560,000 to start a company, and then in the first year have continued to support that to the point that our team is continuously expanding, and we're cash flow positive after less than a year of actually being in operation. And what we do, we make this product called Twine, and I think the best way to describe what Twine is, it's sort of an internet backpack for everything that you have that doesn't talk to the internet by itself, which is pretty much everything except for your smartphone and your tablet. And I think this slide, if we could bring up the first slide, I think this really tells the story. Last year, ARM Holdings produced about 10 billion processors, billion with a B, under license. And of those, only about half went into smartphones and tablets. So that means that there are 5 billion potential devices that were produced last year that potentially could have talked to the internet, and in doing so could have really expanded your perspective into the world. So people right now, we have superpowers in that we can settle a bet with our smartphone at a moment's notice, or know what's going on in virtually any other person's life that has to be connected to a media outlet or a smartphone. But the thing is, that really only tells you about where the people are and where people are manually entering, in large part, the data that they want to share. And I think the next wave, instead of having maybe superpowers of information or of capability that a smartphone gives you, is to have almost like superhuman X-ray vision and super hearing. It's this idea that we can now be aware of virtually anything we want to be aware of, completely independent of the location that we happen to be sitting in. I mean, today the situation is somewhat comical in the sense that I'm sitting here in Los Angeles and my house could be on fire, which is the most valuable thing that I have, and I would have no idea that that might be happening at this moment until maybe the fire department called me. And in a sense, maybe 50 years ago that would be different. So we had a sensor network, and it was that nosy neighbor that lived next door, and she knew my phone number or how to get in touch. And so I think things like twine, we have a twine on our front door right now. We have a dog, and my wife's a lawyer, so we have a college student that comes and walks our dog during the day. And my wife is really concerned about our dog. It's sort of our kid. We just got married, so our dog is our kid for the moment. And the twine sends her text message whenever our front door opens. And so she knows when the door opens around 12:30 that the woman has come to take the dog out. And then she can even see when the door opens again. When the dog comes back, she knows that went out for a nice long walk and had a good time in the sunshine. It wasn't just a little 5-minute quick trip around the block and then out to the corner store. So the idea is really that there's an incredible potential, even right now, in what we consider to be very early days. So we built a product that isn't for a specific purpose. And I think that was a challenging concept, but one that was really important in the industry, because to date, we've seen a lot of business-to-business people trying to target another business to deploy sensors for a particular business purpose. We've also seen a lot of platform developers. People are saying, I'm going to build this technology that's going to be critical to the Internet of Things. But the problem is that there aren't any applications yet. And the application is really how you get the value, and then the value is how you get the revenue from the consumer. So we decided we would sell something directly to the consumer and try and create value from day one and take sort of a bottom-up approach to demonstrating the viability of this business model. And even though, like I said, it's very early, our 5-man team, and since we started shipping in October, our revenue is well over $1 million. And I think that really says something about where the industry is going. And it's very exciting to us. And I think there are actually quite a few challenges to keeping that growth on that accelerating geometric pace. And we can certainly talk about those more if you like, Jonathan.
Well, let's start with your portrait of the future, which is where is the industry going? You, if anybody, had been able to be in Austin for South by Southwest or in Las Vegas for the Consumer Electronics Show. Twine, in many respects, was one of the real bells of the ball. People really wanted to understand, have a tactile experience with your product. What do you think is inspiring that sense of human interest in owning or having personal agency and ownership on the Internet of Things? Don't we, like many other more complicated technological platforms, want to outsource that, or is it actually now something we want to insource?
Sure. I think the thing that really inspires people about the Internet of Things, or the idea that something other than a smartphone can be connected to the Internet, it's really simple to encapsulate. People don't really expect inanimate objects to talk. I mean, this is the first time in human history that that's really happened. And when I give a demonstration of twine frequently, we have a website that just basically shows the status. This block is loaded with wireless radios, 2 AAA batteries, and sensors. And I'll flip it over in my hand, and the website behind me in real time will show the picture of the block on the screen rotate exactly the same way that I'm doing. And especially if someone is holding their own hand and doing that, it's fascinating. It's like you're 5 and you just picked up, a playing card or a rock or something that's very mundane, but you just sort of rotate it in your hand. And this idea that there's this connection that's in real time between something that has no obvious technological thing about it and the Internet, which is the most technological thing that we know, and that they respond to each other in real time between the physical world and the digital. Crossing that bridge is humongous. And smartphones don't quite get to that uncanny valley because they're so obviously technological. It is a slice of technology that you hold in your hand. Whereas this is an inanimate object that's been given a voice for the first time. And I think that is something that's really, really powerful. And right now it's a backpack, which is a really unfortunate form factor for everyday life, but it's the reality of starting at the bottom. You can't say everyone's going to follow a standard and just ordain that will happen. You have to start somewhere. But what's going to happen is this is going to dissolve, and it's going to permeate every single device in your life, in your house, in your car. All of those things that are learning things about you or currently don't have any sensing at all are going to have that ability. And we're going to suck up all of your however many trillion IP addresses that Cisco is going to provide for us. We are going to increase by a factor of 10 or 100 the number of devices that are connected to mobile networks. And we are going to be by far the largest emerging market for the mobile space, is going to be people via things.
Well,
David,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to jump on behind your point because we see it very similarly, right? And I think we've done some investigation on this, right? And when you take a step back, you really look at it, 99% of the world's things are actually unconnected. So whether it's your front door or my front door, or, the dog's collar, I think is going to be next here. I think, exactly. We see it very similarly, and we have some numbers that say by the end of 2020, so in the end of this decade, there'll be 50 billion connected devices. So I think just supporting everything you said, and I think the kind of innovation is just going to be tremendous. So that is a cool little thing. I'm going to have to get myself one of those.
Excellent.
We speak about the infinite possibilities before us in mobile innovation. But now let's turn a little bit to what are the ceilings of the possible? What are the limits of the possible? We know that despite infinite possibilities that we're talking about here, there's a finite amount of electromagnetic spectrum available to be the oxygen to inspire this innovation. It's a real issue. I know, Kit, that Cisco has been doing a lot of research and thinking about what are the challenges of this so-called spectrum crunch. Mm-hmm. You've also been innovating and thinking through implementations and technologies that can help us avert or mitigate the impact of limited spectrum availability.
Absolutely.
I think it would be useful for all of us to reflect a little bit on spectrum, what it means to the future of innovation, and what we need to do collectively as innovators, but also in partnership with governments who are in fact the repository of the fiduciary of spectrum assets to ensure that we'll have this sustainable glide path of availability for our networks to continue to scale and our consumers to continue to benefit. Kit, why don't you start with talking a little bit about spectrum, what it means, and what we need to do to keep having more of it.
So this is the magic question, right? I mean, if any of you watch, how many billions of dollars Verizon and Sprint and AT&T here in the U.S., but globally, how many dollars they spend on getting spectrum licenses, we all know that it's hugely valuable. It's foundational, and so the reality on the other side is that, as you said, it is, from a physics perspective, it's limited, right? And even if we wanted to allocate all of it to the mobile web, we wouldn't, right? We still need things for police radios, a spectrum for police radios and television stations and radio stations and satellite signals. So it's limited, and it's got to be, we've got to be disciplined in how we use it. That being said, there's another aspect to this policy, which is not just how the spectrum is allocated, but in a lot of cases, our customers, the network operators, actually have a hard time putting up new cell sites. So, how many people complain about coverage at their home, right? I mean, I've complained about it, right? How many people want to have a cell site in your backyard, right? It's the old not in my backyard problem. So there's policy on a local basis as well that's really gotten actually pretty strict around how many cell sites we can put up. So we actually think the answer is to not build more big towers and sort of create more what I think a lot of people now consider to be things that they don't want in their backyard, public eyesores, but actually to take these networks and actually divide them down and actually build small cells. So this is something Cisco has been very focused on, is actually building, similar to the kind of small devices, small radios. And so what we're actually doing is we're building some technology now that's going to enable our Wi-Fi access points, those dinner plate size things you see on the ceiling in your office buildings and hotels, and actually enable those to be 3G and 4G enabled. Put those radios in there. And that's actually a big part of how we solve the spectrum crunch, is by moving from very large cells to much smaller ones. It gives us a lot more throughput on the existing spectrum. So again, that's how we're going to deal with the physics, and also with some of those policy challenges, like I said, of getting those radios mounted on the outsides of buildings or building those towers. I think if we can do that, if we can move to this small cell model, where again we use multiple radio technologies, we'll actually see the spectrum increase by an order of magnitude. The throughput on the existing spectrum increase by about an order of magnitude within the next few years. So we're very optimistic there. We bought a few companies in this space, and we're going to invest quite a bit to make that vision a reality.
Is that a reality sufficient, Corey? 99% of inanimate devices not connected, almost a third of the world population still on the on-ramp for the mobile internet. Where do you see the solution set for ensuring availability of spectrum? Is it just small cells, or do we need to go beyond small cells as well?
So, as a software company, a lot of our thinking in this is whichever of the myriad different approaches to this move forward, whether it is microcells, whether it is mesh, whether it is a pretty common behavior in data poor regions, which is to do the morning load up. So you take your phone, you connect to a Wi-Fi network, which tends to be more available and more freely available in a lot of regions than actual data 2.5G or 3G connections. And so you basically pull in a lot of data at that point and then consume it during the course of the day. And similarly, you queue up additional data exchanges for when you either get home or get onto a Wi-Fi network again. And certainly from my perspective, there are pieces that make any of these approaches better. One is, as you start having the ability to have a sense of identity that you carry with you, that becomes really useful for which networks are you allowed on, which networks are comfortable sharing their bandwidth with you, which of these many different data sources that are going to be online are you willing to share with yourself, with your family, with your friends. Because obviously, as soon as you start talking additional data sources that are connected to the web, certainly privacy becomes a very important issue there. And even more so than privacy, when does it make sense to have a good sense of sharing? So like, I think the house burning down case is one of the most beautiful examples where a sensor that gives information about what's going on in your house, to some degree, you probably want to keep quite private, since if it's sensitive enough, it's going to tell you whether anyone's in your house. But as you get closer and closer to your house is on fire, the number of people you are willing to tell about that event starts increasing pretty greatly. And so, that's actually a pretty complicated calculus that humans are very, very good at and computers are very, very bad at. And so, as a company really focused on software and people and how people want to move information around, I think overlaying behaviors that are very natural to us, to the technologies that are available, becomes another way to start handling this. Certainly, where the investments get made have a pretty profound effect as well. If we look at, I don't actually know whether we have a slide, but if you look at what types of spectrum and what kinds of connections are available worldwide, currently in North America, we are very, very fortunate to have a tremendous availability of LTE. Now, we all want it to be better. Anybody who's tried to use their phone, I don't know, at this conference is somewhat aware of that we still have challenges. But comparatively, we're doing pretty well. And if you go basically anywhere else in the world, and particularly the developing world, you're back on edge networks. And you're back on 2 and 2.5G networks, which, if you've gotten used to being able to download a TV show, going back to 60 kilobits as your bandwidth is a little bit shocking. And so, again, what are the human-centric and social-centric ways to manage what data you're trying to put across that wire based on knowing how much bandwidth you have available?
It's interesting. There has been a lot of excitement and focus on the deployment of 4G LTE. In fact, the US has 69% of LTE subscriptions worldwide, which is exciting. But there's a flip side to that coin. And David, you've reflected previously about, but the story is not just about 4G LTE, particularly when it comes to the Internet of Things. Can you explain?
Exactly, and I'd like to put in 2 other points. One, we have a Cisco femto cell in our office to improve our cell coverage. It works wonderfully, thank you.
Thank you.
And 2, to Corey's point, something that we've actually thought about quite a bit, especially from our work with the Media Lab, was when you have all these devices, no one wants to play IT for 50 devices in their life. That'd be miserable. And I sort of like technology. Really, I think that social networks have given us an incredible model for dealing with many different sources of data about us and with varying levels of trust and varying levels of dissemination that we are comfortable with. And I think that viewing devices that are connected, that are essentially reporting in some respects on our behavior or our surroundings, social networks are an incredible model for how we might manage that information in the future. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what Corey comes up with in that space. I think that's a place that's ripe for innovation. But speaking of a place that's ripe for innovation, my background is in electrical engineering. I study communication theory a lot. And so what Cisco has done, they've taken a finite chunk of bandwidth or space, and they've managed to cram as much data as possible. And every year they pull off some sort of miracle hat trick, where last year they can only get 2 chunks of data, and now they can get 4, and then next year they get 8. But they still have the same size pipe to chunk all this data through. And as an electrical engineer, that is somewhat miraculous to me. And I think that is a real testament to the amount of effort that these companies are investing in developing these technologies. But there is, unfortunately, a slight misalignment I'm seeing on the horizon. And I think that's, right now, their businesses almost necessarily have to be focused on smartphones and tablets, which are by far the largest consumers of bandwidth and by far driving the revenue streams of many of these companies. But we look at something like Twine. So my smartphone uses 5 or 10 gigabytes per month. Twine uses 1 to 2 megabytes per month, so 1,000th as much data. But what is important to Twine? Well, Twine can go for weeks or months without changing its AAA batteries. When was the last time your smartphone worked for like 2 months before you had to recharge it? Yeah, that's not going to happen. Unfortunately, 4G technology and LTE are pushing more bits, but they're pushing the cost and power is increasing to move those bits. And that is a real challenge for someone who wants to connect things very persuasively that are very small, that have no room for batteries. And you certainly don't want to go around and recharge your front door. That would be a heck of a world to live in. So one of the things I see as a major challenge is to sort of develop the technology not only to cram as many bits as possible, to also support a heterogeneous set of devices that are the origin of those bits now. Instead of thinking of everyone wants to have the most data possible, maybe someone wants to have fewer bits, but they want to not pay very much power in order to send them. And thinking about how we can use that spectrum to serve both of those things, I think, is a place where a great amount of innovation is still yet to happen, but I'm very optimistic that that will be possible. And then I think the second place is more a commercial issue, and that's that in large part, the carriers' business models are built around smartphones and tablets. Once again, major source of the revenue, not really a big surprise. But when you're looking at an emerging market like this one, this is a product or something, it's grandchildren, or something that you'll buy at Target or Walmart or Home Depot. And there's not going to be an AT&T representative there to set up your data plan. And no one wants to have another subscription. And so we need to have some ability to have a dialogue with the carrier and say, I want 1,000th as much data, but I'm willing to pay maybe 10 or 20x less than I would pay for a data plan. That seems like a fairly reasonable proposition. You give me 1,000th as much, but I only pay you 10 times less. But we need to work on how do we reduce the friction of that transaction so that it's something that's can happen every day, hundreds of times per second at a retail counter, and make sure that whether it's my company that's paying for the data, if it's Facebook that's interested in some of the data and so they're compensating us for some of that, or somehow it's being allocated to the consumer, that there is a viable way to make that business model work. And I think that's a place where it really is just going to come down to having a dialogue with parties that are willing to be open and think about how changes in their behavior might really stimulate the marketplace.
Well, and speaking about the marketplace, let's spend our last few minutes in trying to make our participants rich. We've talked a lot about ideas that become innovative businesses. Let's go across each of us and paint the future for what you think is actually going to be the next really significant, important idea that will become its own industry. And let me start with you, Marianne.
Well, in terms of my domain being healthcare, it's clear that healthcare and our delivery of healthcare is going to be completely revolutionized. Mm-hmm. We will not be going to the doctor and waiting for 3 hours anymore or going through that. We will be completely increasing access, not only for us here in the United States, but in all rural areas of the world. And so I think you're going to see just entire revolutionary, we've already started to see it. Mm-hmm. Whole revolutionary industries that are surfacing around what it means for providing healthcare. But the other part, and this is clearly not nearly as glamorous, we will see much more happening in security. As we are forced not forced, as we welcome and run toward this opportunity that we have with these technologies and everything that it changes in our lifestyle, whether it be finance or healthcare or education or politics or social, we will be forced to have to acknowledge and recognize that password IDs and even biometrics are not going to be sufficient. We're going to see some incredible innovations that happen in the next couple of decades, if not sooner, that are going to really revolutionize our world.
Excellent. 30 seconds, Corey.
So how many of you have used Uber? How many of you have used Airbnb? So for those who have not used either of those or do not know what either of those are, so Uber is on-demand limousine service that you basically pull out your phone and say, I need a limo. And basically 100% of the time, within 4 minutes, a limo shows up and will take you where you need to go at a competitive price. Airbnb is a similar peer-based approach to using unused space in cities. So those are both new to a lot of us. And a lot of people find them kind of strangely uncomfortable in weird ways. Like I'd rent out my home to someone else when I'm not there. That seems weird. When you look at the ability for us to share data on those interactions, our ability to have smart devices that tell us about what's going on in those places, software routing, how we share that information, we have yet to see the first businesses that grow up starting at those, viewing those as normal behavior and thinking about what you're going to do next. And I think everything we've just talked about here is going to build toward that.
Thank you. Kit, you've got a 140-word tweet.
Medical is going to be critical. For us, though, it's really about connecting the unconnected and bringing the kinds of social and economic benefits to the rest of the world that we've seen with things like the mobile-based banking. That's, I think, going to change the world, and that's where we see a tremendous amount of innovation, both in terms of lifestyle as well as economic innovation. And we're here to talk about emerging markets. We're pumped up about that.
Excellent. And keeping the eye on the clock, David, you've got a 15-second Snapchat video message that will disappear.
The people who figure out how to manage the 2-order of magnitude increase in data about our personal lives and what that means to a consumer are going to be people that will be the most successful in the next internet.
And that was very good.
Yeah, that was me.
And I think that I can sum it up for all of us. I think this was an extremely good, rich, and very inspiring discussion about the limits of the possibility before us, about the mobile future that I think we're all going to share and extend and build, not only because we're adopting these products, but because of the innovation and the focus and really the passion that my colleagues to my left and my right are bringing to their work. And I thank each of you, as I thank Milken and you for bringing this together.